If Vivian, you want to, or whoever is in charge of recording, Vivian, I will begin. Thanks everyone for coming. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Emergency Ordinance number 20-A14, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. The committee members who are electronically present at this meeting are Allie Pesch, me, Tom Loach, Brian Day, David Mitchell, Doug Bates, Jenny Moore, Costas Albertus, Mike Kunkel, and Valerie Long. And we also have Ann Malik, our Whitehall supervisor, and Jenny Moore, our planning commission representative. County staff members in attendance for this meeting are Vivian Groschel, Carolyn Schaefer, Charles Rapp, Rachel Falkenstein, Michaela Accardi, and Tori Kanopoulos. The persons responsible for receiving public comment are the Crozet Community Advisory Committee. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County calendar and on the Crozet Master Plan update page at publicinput.com/imaginecrozet. During the Q&A portion of this meeting, or portions of this meeting, we invite you to share your comments or questions by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your toolbar. This will notify the meeting facilitator that you would like to speak and you will be placed in the queue. And that applies to both panelists and attendees. Right now, we have 25 attendees in addition to the panelists. If you're joining by phone, press 9 to raise your hand and be placed in the queue to speak. Verbal questions and comments are the preferred method of participation. Alternatively, you can send a question through the Q&A box and staff will read the question or comment aloud. If several similar questions or comments are submitted, staff may summarize due. Am I reading the right thing, Rachel? I thought we decided we were using the chat box.
We did. I thought I had updated that, but maybe I forgot that portion.
Oh, that's okay. So yeah, so we're going to use the chat box for written questions. Just as last meeting we had both going and it was hard to keep up with and a little redundant. So use the chat box and if similar questions or comments are submitted, we can summarize for time constraints. But go ahead and raise your hand and we can we can actually hear you speak, even if you're not a panelist. All comments will be included in the public record and reviewed by staff. So if you type something in the chat, it will be part of the meeting record. All right, so we have minutes to approve if you guys had a chance to review them. And let me know if anybody had any corrections to Joe's minutes that he sent a couple days ago.
They're brief, but I will move their approval.
Second.
Thanks. Did I hear a second?
Yes.
Okay. I think we all get unmuted and everybody that approving the minutes can say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thanks. So we have a little bit of time reserved at the end of the meeting because the committee has a couple of resolutions that were sent out, drafted and shared. And we really want to have time to get to work on those. So I'm going to do my best to make sure that that happens tonight. And we also have time in a couple of weeks to continue discussing that. So that's all I have. Rachel, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Actually, Charles Raff is going to start us off, and while I let him introduce himself, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, are you all able to see that? Okay.
Yep.
Charles, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, good evening, everybody. It's been a few months since I've spoken at one of these meetings. But just want to reintroduce myself, Charles Rapp, the Director of Planning. I know we have a lot on our agenda this evening, a lot of material to cover, so I will try and be quick so we can get to the details of everything. But I did just want to take a few minutes at the beginning here to take a step back and kind of speak to the master planning process here at Albemarle County and master plans in general. Should we go to the next slide?
Did that work? Are you able to see that?
No,
The first slide came up. We haven't, if you can go to the next one, see if you can try to go to the next one again.
It is on the next on my screen. It's,
No, we seem to be frozen on your,
can you? All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare and see if that helps.
And if you need me to jump in, Rachel, I can do it.
Okay, let me try one more time and see if it doesn't work, and then I might have you, Michaela, share. Sorry about this. Is that still slide one for you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Michaela, do you mind taking over while I try?
Not at all.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, is that showing up for everyone?
It is.
first slide.
Yep.
There
There
we
you go.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right. So as we kind of work through the development of this plan, you might want to close that popped up. Michaela, your notes are shown. There we go. All right. So as we work through this plan, I wanted to just kind of revisit the idea of master plans and the planning process here at Albemarle County, and kind of focus as far as master plans, just to remind everyone that these are long-range visions. It's really an opportunity to try and shape how this community will evolve over time and to create that vision. And these should be dynamic documents that change over time. They adapt to development, they adapt to demographic changes. They're different than detailed zoning ordinances, which are much more specific. And rather, this is just the long-range vision as to how we want this community to shape. And there are also opportunities to identify infrastructure projects. You know, what has been completed since the 2010 master plan? What new projects need to happen today to meet the needs of the community? And what projects do we need to be thinking about down the horizon to meet the community's future vision? And then the last step of this master planning process, once we get through drafting this plan, is really to start talking about a recommended implementation schedule. And it's a way to really prioritize projects to help with the budget consideration process. Obviously, all projects are subject to available funding, but it's really a way to highlight the key projects, the key priorities that this community needs as a way to plan for the future. So next slide. So I thought it'd be good just to kind of take an overview of the process, what we've done so far, where we are now, and the next steps moving forward to ensure that we ended up with an adopted plan that helps to guide the future growth of the Crozet community. So this process started a little over a year ago in a community visioning process, which is typically how we start out any long-range planning effort. To really establish goals for the community that would guide the plan. And it's important that those visions and those goals are referenced as we develop specific components throughout the plan to ensure that those goals are being met and that vision is going to be met through those recommendations. Then we moved on to the next phase, which is a series of both in-person and virtual focus workshops focused conversations related to character and land use, a lot of which we'll be talking about this evening, to housing, architecture and preservation, connectivity, conservation. And those workshops and those conversations help to identify both the challenges and the opportunities, which will then lead to our new solutions, new ideas, and provide emphasis on those key priority projects, which we'll get to towards the end of this planning process.
Charles, sorry, can I just say one thing? Sean and Joe both are having trouble. They're both as attendees instead of panelists. I don't think they could find their panelist link tonight. And also, I just want to say I hope we can move through this part quickly because we are so up to date on this part, and we really want to get to the meat of the this background review was not on the agenda.
So just one more slide is all we have.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
And that's where we're going to get to today. So you go to the next slide. All right, so that kind of brings us to where we are today, which is the plan drafting. And that's where we bring together all this data, all the feedback, the consultant work, everything, all the information from the CAC, members of the community, and we want to put that into plan elements, and then we bring that to the Planning Commission, bring that to the Board of Supervisors, and get feedback from all these different stakeholder groups that then we can put into an actual plan, a draft plan. Again, get feedback from y'all, members of the CAC, members of the community, again, the Planning Commission, again, the Board of Supervisors for final review and edits, and hopefully future adoption by the supervisors. So that's really where we are now at this stage, where we're making sure that we have the right feedback from y'all. We want to get the right feedback from the Planning Commission. We want to get the right feedback from the board and continue this process toward drafting a plan that really represents this community. So with that, I'll hand it off to Rachel to start talking about the specifics of land use categories.
Thanks, Charles. So the purpose for today's meeting is really to focus on the land use recommendations, and we have 4 topics we want to focus on. 2 are new concepts. One is our downtown neighborhoods overlay. One is the middle density residential land use. We also have a focus on Old Trail. We heard that was an important topic that we ran out of time a little bit last time. We wanted to come back to. And then lastly, we have some slides on the recommendations. Just a reminder, nothing is changing with what can be done by right today with a land use map update. This is kind of the vision document and the first step before implementation happens. So feedback is one of the things we wanted to focus our conversation on tonight. We wanted to share with you what feedback we've heard so far as staff, what feedback we're using to inform the land use updates that we're recommending. And we want to hear from you all if you think we've gotten it right, or if you think there are things we were missing or things you haven't shared yet, feedback that you'd like to add to the list. So hopefully you got a chance to read our feedback summary, but some major themes that we'll highlight, like I said, are 2 new land use categories. Other themes that will come out of our discussion tonight later that Michaela and Tori will mention as well are topics of green space and the parcel level changes that we shared at the previous meetings. And if you can go to the next slide, Michaela. This is just a summary of meetings that we've used to inform the land use recommendations that we are presenting to you tonight. As Charles mentioned, we started at the really high level and have continued to hone down and get more detail and iterate on this land use map. The map before you tonight is the same one we shared at our last meeting in September, so we haven't made any changes to that map, just because we wanted to have the second round of feedback based on your request before we make any additional changes. And one more slide, Michaela. And so these are those high level themes I was talking about before that we want to hear your thoughts on if we got it right. We've heard a desire for affordability of housing and a variety of housing types, but also a focus on scale, making sure those housing types are consistent with adjacent development and adjacent neighborhoods, and a scale that's supportive of the small town of Crozet that we've heard is really important to the community. And also that concern that additional growth needs to be kept up with infrastructure. That's been a theme throughout that we want to make sure we're capturing in our recommendations, but also a reminder that infrastructure is going to be our next big focus after we get through the land use and transportation pieces. So we will get to that and spend a lot of time focusing on infrastructure. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela to start talking about our first topic tonight, the downtown neighborhoods overlay.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Michaela Cardi. I'm a senior planner with Albemarle County Community Development. And on this slide is the draft future land use map that was presented to the CAC last month or in September. And before we dig into the specific recommendations, I'll just reiterate that the future land use map and the written recommendations do not change the existing zoning of properties. The master plan is used as a guiding document when staff, the Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors review a rezoning or a special use permit. And there's still a public process for each project that seeks to do something different than the existing zoning. And I'm reiterating that now. I know we have several new folks listening in, so hopefully that's helpful context. The first new land use concept that's included in the draft is the downtown neighborhoods overlay. And the goals of this overlay are to incentivize maintenance and preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing units known as NOAHs, to also preserve historic neighborhoods, and to also support new housing units that have a similar scale and form that aligns with existing neighborhoods. Overlay would apply to areas that have a neighborhood density residential future land use designation near downtown. And again, it would be used for reviewing, rezoning, or special use permit requests. The recommended density for this overlay are 3 to 6 units per acre, with higher densities possible if housing form and criteria are met. I have a couple of slides on those criteria in just a moment. But the housing types recommended within this overlay include single family homes, duplexes, multiplexes, bungalow courts, live work units, and or accessory dwelling units. And these are some photos that the CAC has seen before of these different types of units. On the left is a multiplex that's been converted from a historic home, and that's what's reflected in the diagram in the center as well. And accessory dwellings can be attached to a home or detached or potentially above a garage. And so the criteria for allowing additional density would be 2 that are a development would need to meet both of. The first, that development's in keeping with a prevailing development pattern. This seeks to address the form of buildings. And the second, that additional affordable or workforce housing is provided. And those definitions are on the screen. So in addition to those 2 required elements, the 3 options on your screen before you, a proposal would need to meet one of those. So converting an existing structure to multiple units, adding an accessory dwelling unit on a lot, or infill development that preserves an existing home. And this is the boundary that staff's proposed. In red is the proposed downtown neighborhoods overlay. And in white is the existing Crozet Historic District. You'll see that the downtown neighborhoods overlay is more expansive than the historic district, because we'd heard some feedback that neighborhoods that might not have qualifying historic homes within the historic district still have importance for affordable housing units along Hilltop Street and Myrtle Street and along 3 Notched as well. And this is a graphic that all the details aren't super, I've reiterated them already, but it's meant to show that the master plan is really used in that special use permit or rezoning process. So that criteria that I walked through would be what staff and the Planning Commission and the board would review to assess whether a proposal is appropriate. And we've heard some feedback and questions about how this overlay would be implemented. So staff has a couple scenarios that hopefully demonstrate how this could be used. This is a historic home on St. George Avenue. And if it were to be converted into multiple units and an accessory dwelling unit provided, homeowners sometimes tend to do this in other localities to make maintenance of a home more affordable. And if this were done, 5 units on a half-acre lot would be 10 units per acre, and typically not recommended under the neighborhood density residential future land use category. Alternatively, another scenario is the Pleasant Green site. And if the developer wanted to add additional density to the site, they could request a rezoning, and staff would look for the following elements in their application based on the criteria for this overlay. The scale of the development, ensuring that it's consistent with housing forms that are adjacent along Kling Lane and Macomb Street, for example, that existing historic structures are preserved, and that additional affordable housing required above what is normally required with a rezoning were included. And again, feedback is a big portion of this meeting that we'd like to review with you all. And we've heard so far that there's a desire to preserve existing homes, affordable housing, and expand opportunity to, quote, missing middle housing types like the bungalow courts and accessory dwellings. We've also heard that infill development located close to downtown provides an opportunity to support small business development in a walkable and bikeable area. Community members have also shared concerns with us about implications of additional density on infrastructure and school capacity. Some CCAC members and neighbors in the downtown neighborhoods overlay area also shared an interest in further staff work to guide or regulate architectural styles, though that's beyond the scope of this project. That could be a potential recommendation. And I hopefully went through that quickly enough that I just want to open this up for questions about whether this summary is accurate on feedback, and if you have any additional comments or questions that staff should consider.
Thanks, Michaela. Jenny, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to actually make a comment, and it's relevant to what Michaela just presented, but back to the slide that Rachel showed that talked about themes that have emerged. And on one of the bullet points, it was preserving the existable affording housing stock near downtown. And I guess my takeaway, and where I'd like to see this possibly embedded in that comment or somewhere else, is that it's not just that, but it's like what I've heard from the community is it's preserving the character of that area, not just the existing affordable housing stock, but the character that I think a lot of people identify when they think about Crozet, particularly those neighborhoods surrounding downtown. And I think that's where there's some, in my opinion, some work to be done in the overlay concept that Michaela just talked about, where, you know, we talk about prevailing development patterns, but if you look at the development pattern that's happening in Pleasant Green, it's not consistent with those neighborhoods that exist around it. And so one suggestion that has come out of the Historic Preservation Committee, one member had a suggestion of, you know, if you're really trying to keep that character, particularly those that are historic, that something in the overlay should contain some type of like architectural design guidelines, if that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. So I would very much like to see, and what I think I've heard from a lot of the community is not just protecting the housing stock, but protecting the character. And so that is the historic nature of that area. I'd like to see that added in somewhere, because I think I've heard that mentioned multiple times. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. I agree. Tom?
Yes, one of the problems I have with the overlay, I guess the biggest one, is that the infrastructure is not there. If you read the Crozet master plan, starting with the first master plan, what you'll notice is the master plan is based on a neighborhood model. Therefore, the neighborhood model calls for both curb, sidewalk, and gutter. In the areas that you have in the overlay district, that is not the case. It seems to me that we don't have separate but unequal neighborhoods in Crozet. What's good for Old Trail should be good for these other neighborhoods. Now, especially if you're talking about entering higher density housing into the mix. So if the county wants to retrofit those areas with the appropriate sidewalk, curb, and gutter, that's fine on them. Although I would say it has to be done after the bridge is built and after we, have all the other infrastructure like the school that we need. But until then, like I said, I don't think we should accept separate but unequal neighborhoods. You have an obligation for infrastructure. It's neighborhood model. That's the standard. You must keep with it. Thank you very much.
Do any other committee members have comments right now? There's Sandy is also stuck in attendees. If someone can move her over to panelists. Brian, go ahead.
I just kind of wanted to pick up on Tom's comments. Overall, the concept of this overlay district is something that I'm extremely supportive of, but I'm very concerned that we might, in the process of adding this overlay district, in addition to protecting historical housing and so forth, we have the risk of yet more increase in density when it's not safe to walk or bicycle anywhere almost in this overlay district. And we don't have a way for kids to get to a school. The school isn't large enough. There isn't another way to get around downtown until we build the bridge. So I'm appreciative of the fact that staff have clearly captured the infrastructure concern, but it encourages further density increases when the infrastructure is just not there. Thanks.
I just want to, I know some people maybe joined late, and some comments and questions are coming in the Q&A box. And if you can, try to use the chat box. I'm going to let Valerie go, and then maybe we'll get a chance to get some other attendee. Go ahead, Valerie.
Thank you. I appreciate the idea that the staff has come up with. I think it's a creative solution to help address the community's clear outpouring of support for additional affordable housing and sort of different types of affordable housing. But it has a lot of thoughtful kind of guardrails and criteria put in place to help avoid some potential adverse impacts that could be associated with it. I appreciate Tom's comments and Brian's, but I think it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve all the problems, of course, but I think it's a good step in the right direction to help further the affordable housing needs in the community, and can be a really good option for people who may own some of these older historic homes that are very expensive to maintain the older that they get. And it would be at their choice to pursue this if they can satisfy the criteria. So I support the ideas and the protections that are built into it. Thank you.
Joe, thank you.
Yeah, I kind of echo Valerie's point. I think this is a creative solution. I certainly appreciate Tom's and Brian's point about infrastructure. One thing I think that's unique about this, though, is because this seems like this kind of development, to the extent it does add density, is going to be on much more of a piecemeal fashion. One project, one small property, a few units here, as opposed to a large development. So I think that kind of mitigates some of those concerns. Like, we're not adding a ton of density all at one time. And I will just to speak to the point that Jenny raised about architectural controls. I had thought about that previously, about some sort of, and I don't know that architectural control is right. I know Rachel was saying it's sort of beyond the scope, and I don't know that there needs to be any sort of intense architectural control like you'd find in a development or something, or even in a downtown district. But I think it could be handled more generally. Basically, with Rachel, I think that what she was saying kind of captures it. Basically, just some general guidelines about being within, keeping in the spirit and sort of consistent with the character of the surrounding structures or things like that. I think that kind of captures it enough without being sort of more specific.
So I respond to that really quick.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, so that comment was not necessarily to be strict to say architectural controls, but some design standards. That comment was something that I wanted to bring forward because staff came a couple months ago to the Historic Preservation Committee to this idea. So in the context, I think during the presentation, we had a late start to the meeting. And there was, these members are experts about historic preservation, not about land use and master planning. So there wasn't a lot of time for them to give input. When we circled back to that topic at this last meeting, that was basically from a historic preservation standpoint, without having something in there that talks about design standards, it doesn't, at least one member's opinion was, it doesn't really offer much as far as historic preservation. And maybe that's not the goal here, but I still think that I have a fair point in that we are talking about the character of that. And to Joe's point, maybe what is being suggested does capture that. But I just wanted to make sure that from a historic preservation standpoint, without having something in there, and it doesn't have to be super strict, but that without having something, it doesn't do much for historic preservation. And I would like to add, that to be honest, a lot of I think the idea of converting an older home into multiple dwellings is nice, but the reality of that and the cost of that, if you talk to lots of people who own or know about historic homes, is often not really financially feasible, but it is a nice idea. So thank you.
I saw Tom and Brian.
Yeah, thank you. The issue of sidewalk, curb, and gutter is not a one that's, let me put it this way, it's a requirement. It's built into the master plan. I mean, that's what's supposed to happen in Crozet, and to do it piecemeal, as Joe is suggesting, like one house at a time. So he gets in and we put 30 foot of sidewalk, curb, and gutter, maybe over the next 20 years, we have what we need. I don't think is acceptable. I mean, the county has an obligation to provide the necessary infrastructure if it wants the additional density. Not to mention that we are already over the recommended density given by the original consultants, 17 in all of them, by the way, during the original master plan. So, it's like the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Jenny, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to ask a question. With the way the staff has worded what's in the overlay district, when we talk about neighborhood character, is the Planning Commission, is there enough teeth in this language for your review of a project to actually accomplish keeping the character, or do we need something stronger than that? I like the kind of flexibility, but then I wonder what it would be like to sit in your shoes.
Thanks. Good question, Brian.
Yeah, I think that's, trying to respond to the idea of the overlay district has been a little bit difficult because it's been hard to, get into all the details that staff would, weigh that against and then give us information and their recommendation, which is part of the discussion that we have when something like this would come through. And I recognize that staff aren't going to draft a final, version of what this would look like for us until we can get through this discussion. But up until this point, we've had a really high level discussion, and it's been difficult to grasp, how the criteria would be applied. And that's why I've had some angst over, why Pleasant Green is included in this when the prevailing development pattern, if you compare that to the prevailing development pattern against Pleasant Green itself, then sure, a whole bunch of more squished in there might make sense. If you compare it to Clean Lane and those neighborhoods that are already around it, they already have broken the prevailing development pattern. So I think this one is tough for me. And I guess, I want to see what other people think and I want to move forward. But I think what we've learned from master planning in the past is if there's ambiguity and room for different interpretations of what we meant to say and what was said, that always leads us into a place that's not great and that's confusing. So I think it needs to be very clear. And I think, from the preserving the character of the neighborhoods and the development pattern, I think we probably need to be a little more clear about what that looks like. And I think that's probably staff's intention, So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's hard to know at this point. The way it is now, I think it leaves a lot open to individual commissioners to sort of take it as they might see, if it's fitting or not, and it's not. That makes me a little bit nervous that it would be, and that it may not be that we can pin it down to be so specific, because every piece of property is different and all these little neighborhoods have their nuances. But I think leaving it up to interpretation in other cases outside of the overlay district have not done us well in the past. So whatever we can do to make what we expect very clear, and that nobody's reading the same thing and taking away something different from it, is our goal here. And in this overlay, I feel like that I need to know more. I need to see more to know that it would be something that would be able to be applied consistently. But I do applaud staff. I do think it's a creative idea. I still am just trying to learn more about it and become a little more comfortable with it.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, Sandy has a question, and I also I don't totally understand why Pleasant Green was included in it, since it doesn't have, especially the far end of it, since it doesn't have, it's undeveloped, so it doesn't have historic homes that we need to incentivize preserving or anything in it. So I really don't understand why it extends through there, except for to provide that developer an opportunity to increase their density. Sandy, what's your point?
Yeah, no, I think this is all about expanding density, and I'm not sure why we're doing this. I agree with Tom. I think that the county needs to live up to its commitments to this community by providing the infrastructure that we keep asking for. I'm really concerned about this notion of turning single family homes into multiple units, because I don't know where the cars are going to go. You start getting cars parked on these historic, charming old streets, and it looks terrible. These neighborhoods were not really designed for what you're talking about, which is greatly increased density. And with regard to Hilltop, I would not favor putting Hilltop in the overlay area, because it is a neighborhood with a certain look. You start tearing down some of those little houses and putting in multiple units, the street is simply not equipped for the traffic that you're going to bring in. And, this idea that we're close to downtown, so we're all going to walk, or that we're making worker housing for these alleged jobs, is nonsense. People are going to be driving. They're going to need to put their cars somewhere. They're going to have jobs in Charlottesville. Let's don't fantasize. This is the reality. We're a suburb.
Dan?
Could someone bring back the list of the criteria again? Because what Sandy just said really goes to the heart of where I think the criteria were aimed, that number 1 and 2, you're not tearing down those houses and putting up something that's 50 units. If I understand correctly, what's being proposed.
I want to know that too, because if you only have to meet one of the requirements of the second set. Yeah, but this one, it doesn't specifically say that you have to preserve a historic or an existing dwelling. Am I wrong?
Michaela, can you go to the next slide, this slide? Yes. So these are the 2 criteria that we're saying have to be met in order to qualify for additional density. So it has to be kind of the scale expectations, or this be in keeping with the scale of adjacent development, and it has to provide additional affordable housing. So Pleasant Green is an example, and I'll just speak to that really quickly, why we included it. It's kind of a judgment call, and if the feedback is not to include that, we'll share that certainly. We included it because we were looking at kind of just historic parcel lines. There are 2 or 3 historic homes on that property previously, before it was kind of subdivided up, and so that's where we do the boundary.
What?
The development that is going in,
sorry, Rachel, I really okay, that's just not true. There were 2, and one of them is already torn down. So there's just really, I want to and I also just feel a little bit like when you say I'm going to take, I am providing feedback, and I would be willing to take sort of show of hands from the group as well as the community, like, do you guys think that this overlay should apply to a big open space of undeveloped Stanley Martin property or not? And then whose plan is it? It's like when you say you're gonna, if you get impact, you'll include that. Like, I thought we were all like, this is we are here right now deciding what's going to be in, and then like, yeah, we're going to bring it to the PC and the board, the decision makers. So like, anyway, so I would just like to know of you guys, do you guys think that that area of undeveloped Pleasant Green should be included in this bonus density opportunity?
No.
Can we first have Rachel either repeat or clarify her answer to your question? I either missed it or didn't understand. Something about 2 houses, or do you mind?
Yeah, I mean, she said that there were 2 or 3 historic homes in Pleasant Green before it was developed, and which is true that there were 2. One of them has already been torn down. So and one of them they've already preserved and turned into the clubhouse. So look, we can talk about this in real terms because this is an actual development underway. It's not potential. We don't have any reason to guess what's going to happen there. We already have the site plan. We already have the historic home torn down, and we already have the historic home preserved. So there's really no reason that they should qualify for this bonus density, in my opinion. Rachel, you can reiterate what you were going to say.
I'll finish off what I was saying. The western boundary is the stream. That's how the western boundary was drawn. And then the other boundaries were the historic parcel lines where the historic homes used to be. I understand one has been torn down. I will also comment that the development, we're not talking about the development that's going on in the first phase of Pleasant Green. I think that is a little bit more intense in scale than some of the adjacent properties right there. If they were to come in with a new plan, we would review that under these criteria. I wasn't trying to say that what they're building now would meet this criteria. That was not my intent.
Right, but if the criteria say that it is in keeping with surrounding developments and the surrounding development is a bazillion townhouses, then it will qualify with these criteria. Go ahead, Anne.
I think originally we were talking about existing older neighborhoods.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
where protecting original houses. If someone puts an extra unit in their side lot, 1 or 2, the example, the scenario of a little house on St. George all of a sudden having 10 units, to me is not in the scale of what we've been talking about for the last 6 months. It's way over the top. So that's just my view and sort of the surprise from hearing that being put in there, but very clearly, this was to be focused on the existing neighborhoods close in, the ones especially with the smaller houses now that are in the highest jeopardy of conversion. And staff came up with the scale and size and scale compatibility things. And I really hope we will get more than just 2 required, but several other of those 5 need to be included as requirements too. Otherwise, we will lose it altogether. And the worst case scenario that everyone has described will become the truth.
Right. So before we move on, I'm just going to really buckle down on this. Do other people agree with me that the Pleasant Green, at least that one part, if we do like the overlay, do we think that it's fair for an undeveloped portion of Pleasant Green to be included in this overlay?
No.
No.
And why don't people put their vote in the chat, please, so it's all written down?
And when you vote no, you can go ahead and say no and the whole sentence, so it doesn't get lost in the minutes that what you're saying no to. I'd be fine with everybody being unmuted for a second so we can really get a straw poll.
Okay, so I'm saying no.
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 All right. So Rachel, I mean, if anybody wants to raise their hand and comment more, Joe, I see your hands up, but just for the record, the voice of the CAC, I feel, is that part should not be included in your recommendation for the overlay. And I also would like to clarify that these criteria do not specifically include that that the existing unit is preserved. So if, you know, that house that you showed us on St. George in the example, that cute brick house built in 1903, they could come and meet this criteria just by, yes, meeting the first two, but they could also just do infill, right? I mean, or, you know, because they could just meet one of the criteria is just an addition of an accessory dwelling. So that doesn't mean that they keep the existing house. Can you clarify that? That gets a little vague there if you could meet it with just that middle bullet point.
And the prevention of the tear down was also an original criteria at the very beginning of all this discussion. Just so we remember that.
A lot of houses on Hilltop and a lot of houses on St. George, you know, Myrtle, could go away for is my fear. And those are
I appreciate the clear feedback. I think that's exactly why we want to have this meeting tonight, and we will take that recommendation to the Planning Commission from the CAC. I see that Jody has appeared, and she might want to say something, so I want to just turn it over to her real quickly.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, CAC members. My name is Jody Filardo, and I'm the Community Development Director for Albemarle County. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I appreciate, hi, Allie. We haven't had a chance to meet in person yet, and someday maybe we will. I just wanted to be really clear with everyone on this call this evening. Number one, we really value your input, and I thank you for all the hard work you've put into getting us all to this point. Just to be very specific, please be advised that all of the input that you all are providing this evening will be moving forward to the Planning Commission. It will all come together though. The CAC recommendations will be one set of information. All the other feedback we've received from other stakeholders will also move forward. So just to be clear, the staff will compile all of this and bring it forward on everyone's behalf. So you needn't spend your valuable time this evening going through things to this detail. We will represent that these are the findings of the CAC as that moves forward, but that will come with all the other feedback and considerations from the variety of stakeholder conversations and focus groups we've had. So I just wanted you to know that will come forward as a compendium. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jody. I'm losing track of who had their hand up first. I know Tom and Valerie.
Actually, can I add just really quick? I appreciate that, Jody, but I think the point of getting into that detail was that this has been a reoccurring question about the overlay and its intent, and having a property that's undeveloped and is a by right and, you know, has a plan to develop pretty densely. The question of whether or not to include that has been a very specific part of it. I think, you know, we can't get into all the details, and I totally appreciate your input there. And I think it's reassuring for folks to know that. But I think this is one piece that's been a little bit of a hang up for some people. And so I do think that was an important detailed part to get into, even though I know we can't do that with every piece. I just wanted to add that because it's come up a bunch of times when we talked about the overlay. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we've waited a long time to really get into the details, and so I'm appreciating having a chance to do it with, you know, we've got 44 attendees and 20 panelists, so I'm really appreciating having this chance. And Valerie, and we do have to move on to the middle density topic too.
Absolutely. I just wanted to see, maybe I'm the only one who felt differently than you and some of the others, Allie, but I thought you were saying, does everyone who agrees, please answer. And then I thought you were going to ask if there were any dissenting folks, and I didn't get an opportunity.
Does anybody think that Pleasant Green should be included in the overlay bonus density?
I've spelled out my comments or my opinion in the comments, but I think it's fine. It's not just about preserving historic neighborhoods, but providing affordable housing and a variety of additional housing types. So I don't think we need to distinguish as long as they satisfy all the criteria. Thank you.
I agree with Valerie. Anything you can do to give owners flexibility to provide that, we should.
Right. I appreciate you guys chiming in. It just sounds a lot like an opportunity for higher density, and that's not what I hear the community can handle right now with existing infrastructure. So, okay, Sandy, I see your hand up and I'm getting pressure.
Yeah, and I still don't feel like I've gotten a straight answer with regard to Hilltop. I know it's just one street in the mix, but I'm not really clear on why it's being included in the downtown overlay. And my concern is that there are inadequate protections for existing neighbors. And I've invited Jenny to my home and anybody else who wants to come by. That's a nice straight street with huge backyards. And of course, the Parkside Village people were looking through the backyards to the mountains. Somebody sold the lot next door. Somebody built a house in the backyard that blocked the mountain for anybody who had a view of it. I mean, I just think that Hilltop is kind of a special case. It's nice that we have these little houses that are affordable, but they're on big lots, and somebody needs to look at that situation and figure out what language we can put in to protect from the development of tall or large homes and multifamilies in that neighborhood.
Anyway, I do think that, luckily these are, this is, these would still have to go before, for rezoning, and we would be able to consider them on a case by case basis. But I do think that I feel like I have some support that this is potentially opening the door to projects that a lot of neighbors are not going to be happy with. So I had one question I do want to see if we can address before and then quickly move on to middle density is, Jody, when you said other stakeholders, can you clarify who you meant? Mike asked this in the chat.
Yes, I just had to unmute myself.
Sure.
I was referring to the array of meetings that the team has held over the last year. It wasn't a particular stakeholder group. It was folks that showed up at the coffee shop when our folks were out there, that came out to visit us when we were in, I think, well, I don't know. I'm going to defer to Rachel to help me out here, or Michaela, a list of all the meetings that we had prior to. That was what I was referring to.
A lot of us are participating in all of these steps. So yes, hopefully we're all getting heard. All right, let's see if we can get to the next topic. Rachel, thank you.
Allie, before we leave this, may I address the stakeholder question?
Yeah.
I think that there is a glaring omission in the list of stakeholders involved here. And this goes far beyond just this particular subject matter. I believe that we need an economic analysis, and we have an economic development leader at Albemarle County, Roger Johnson. I would like to have him come to our next meeting. I would like to understand how these externalities are being measured, whether they're positive or negative. They need to be factored into all of these questions, and they are not right now. I'm hearing a lot of good noise about what developers need and what the community wants, but I have not heard any specific economic analysis of what the infrastructure needs are for this community. And until we have that, we're just going to be grasping at straws.
Thanks, Doug.
I will share that there was a market assessment done, and we've shared that out. I think it was pre-COVID at this point, but I'd be happy to reshare that with the group. And
I've read the market analysis. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for.
I think he's really talking about how we're going to pay for the schools and the roads. Am I wrong, Doug?
Yeah, you're wrong too. There's always costs associated with a big change, like a new development. And these costs are not being captured by the developers, and they're being borne by the community, and we haven't identified what those are. Some are easy. How many kids are going to school? How many cars are going to be parked on the street? But there are a lot of things involved here, and we don't have that kind of analysis.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
I think if it's okay, Allie, we're probably ready to go ahead and move on to the middle density topic, and Michaela's going to present that piece as well, and we'll pause after that one for more discussion.
Thank you.
Sorry, dealing with a couple different screens, so just getting set up. Thanks for patience, but I'll move through this as quickly and clearly as possible. So the middle density residential land use category is the second new land use concept that this draft plan introduces. And it is aimed to provide increased housing choices and affordability, as well as smaller scale development patterns that are consistent with existing neighborhoods and Crozet's identity as a small town. This category would recommend low to middle density housing types that are smaller in footprint and scale and provide for a range of housing options that are more likely to remain affordable over time. And this land use category as drafted would include form recommendations and identify appropriate housing types: smaller scale, single family detached, duplexes, multiplexes, townhomes, live work units, bungalow courts, which are shown in the top right photo, and accessory dwellings. We've heard feedback about large scale apartment buildings not being appropriate. So we have incorporated language about small multifamily developments acceptable with building footprints under 5,000 square feet and comparable in height to nearby buildings. And the density recommendations for this category would be between 6 to 24 units an acre. And this density range considers common densities that are required for these housing types to be developed, density ranges that exist in current county land use categories. The middle density land use category would be a new one. It doesn't exist yet across the county and within existing developments in Crozet. Again, this is a graphic similar to the last land use category to demonstrate that this middle density land use category is not a zoning change, and it would be incorporated when a special use permit or a rezoning request was submitted and an application would be reviewed against this criteria for form and density if a property had this designation on it. And the density range that I just described was in part derived from looking at existing development patterns in Crozet. In Wickham Pond, for example, these townhomes have accessory dwellings in them, and there are 14 units located on just over half an acre. So the density calculation there would be 27 units an acre, and the housing types would look like, for one way they might look are the townhomes pictured on the left. In addition, in Old Trail Village, there are single family homes with accessory dwellings over the garage. And in the area that's shown in red on the right of the screen, there are 29 units on just under 2 acres. So the math there is 15 units an acre. So these are some examples that staff used to evaluate form and density recommendations. And again, we've shared this concept with the CAC over the summer and the fall. And some feedback that we've heard is that there's support for creating a new land use category as a balanced approach to provide affordable housing that's also in scale with Crozet. We've also heard concern from CCAC members about an increase in potential population due to ongoing concerns about infrastructure needs, traffic, and school capacity. And on this map here, there are the letters A2 don't indicate a land use category. They're an annotation to show where the middle density residential would be applied. Some examples include portions of Old Trail, Foothill Crossing, and Whitegate Farm. So I'll pause there for comments on staff's review of the feedback we've heard so far, as well as additional comments and questions.
Thanks, Michaela. Does anybody want to go first? Valerie, I don't know if your hand was up from before or, okay. No comments on middle density. Tom, oh, sorry. Your hand's covered up by my chat box.
Good, thank you. On the middle density, you just showed Old Trail and Wickham Pond. So I assume that this type of housing, which you now would call missing middle, whatever you want to call it, has been allowed under the neighborhood model for some time, which means it would have been available to Western Ridge, Bogman Park, Old Trail, Liberty Hall, Wickham Pond 1, Wickham Pond 2, Blue, Foothill Crossing, Chesterfield, Grey Rock North, Waylands, Grand, Corey Farm, Spout. So I'm kind of confused. Why is it coming up now if you had the availability of the county under the neighborhood model to do this over the past 20 years?
I'll respond to that quickly, but we'll definitely take note of your feedback. I think missing middle is a new housing trend we're seeing a lot in planning and haven't seen a lot of it in the county, though we did see one development come through in Crozet on Bamboo Grove. I think it's a recognition that there's not a lot of housing being built that is affordable for kind of middle income folks. And so this land use category is trying to incentivize and encourage those forms of development. It's not to say that it was precluded before, but we're hopeful that these recommendations in this category with the scale and the density will encourage more of it.
It might be helpful if you were to give us some parameters for what you're calling this middle price range, because to many of us, it seems there are tons of townhomes being built, and how much are they costing people? And are those not middle income units?
We don't get into regulating the cost of housing outside of our affordable housing policy. So
that's what we're talking about. How can you not tell us what you're aiming for with this middle zoning? What are you trying to get?
The idea is that the lot size and the unit size being a little bit smaller than some of the lower density areas with large lots and large homes are just naturally more affordable.
Sorry, I was in the chat, but you guys will probably hear me typing, I realized. I'm sorry. Brian, you want to go ahead?
Sorry. I just want to repeat that, when we're talking about bungalow courts and those kinds of things, this is terrific. But if all we're going to do is vastly increase the density, not have the infrastructure, and I realize the staff have acknowledged we have these comments, but I can see what's going to happen, and that is that we're going to create a middle density. We're going to probably see it applied across the county. The county is not going to have the money necessary to build the roads and schools and sidewalks and trails and bicycle connectivity and all of the things that we've said, but the density will go up. And I think that if we're going to do this middle density, maybe townhouses should be exempted completely, because all we're going to see is all the neighborhoods that Tom just mentioned, multiply that across all the development areas in the county, and we're just going to see urban densities. We were talking about, 29 units in less than 2 acres, and huge amounts of traffic, huge increases in school enrollment, and not a snowball's chance that we're going to have the infrastructure to keep up with it. Whereas on a small lot where you put 3 or 4 houses, 4 or 5 units in it, maybe that's the...
You got cut off there. But I know Anne has her hand up, and Valerie and Joe.
Okay. My question is there an overall lot size that is the top limit to qualify as one of these middle density things? Because if it is something like Bamboo Grove, and you're going from 6 units to 9 units, which is how this whole process got started. They had to get a special permit because to really make their project work, they didn't qualify for our existing stuff. This is a great idea. But once it gets multiplied to 20 acres or something, then all of a sudden, this is where the scale gets out of hand. So I just wanted to know if there was a lot size that was just not described in the rollout here that I missed in the details.
So if I can clarify, you're not talking about lot size for individual units, you're talking about overall project size.
So if one were going to have a bungalow court type thing, what's the maximum area that would make it a reasonable thing to be considered to be a compatible infill with an existing neighborhood?
We don't have that included at this time. That's an interesting question, something we can go back and look at. I will say that most of Crozet is built out right now, so you're not likely to see really large developments in most areas, but there are some greenfields, I'll acknowledge that. So that's something we can go back and look at, but had not considered it at this point yet.
And just super quick, that it may be built out now, but a bulldozer could take care of that in a half an hour. So that's my main fear, is that we will look up on a Sunday afternoon and see 5 lots in one of our streets just gone. So I'm really glad that we're struggling with this, because I think it's really, really important, as long as it's considered that we're trying to maintain these neighborhoods, not lose them.
Valerie?
Yeah, it was my understanding, maybe Rachel can clarify, that the idea behind the middle density residential is different from the downtown overlay district option. The downtown overlay was about preserving neighborhoods and historic areas, but also providing more affordable housing. But by contrast, this is a new sort of category of density. If I recall, it was that there was some frustration that you had the neighborhood density, which was very low, and then you had urban density, which was much higher, and not a lot of room in between. And that this was maybe an effort to bridge that gap. Is that correct, Rachel?
Correct. We haven't applied this anywhere else. It's a new land use category we've developed through this master plan process based on feedback. And I think it's a great concept that we'll look at applying elsewhere in the county after we get onto our next master plan update. It is trying to bridge that gap between the two, and also not just densities, but forms. Urban density allows for larger apartments, and this is recommending smaller unit types and capping multifamily at a 5,000 square foot maximum.
Thank you.
Jenny, and I would also, I'm trying to read the chat, and I think Tori, you were going to help me at some point. I'd like to kind of summarize or pull out some chat comments that need to be asked, and then I might I'd like to go ahead and get a feel from the group, like we did on the last question, of where we are, where we are for, you know, where we stand, since not everyone's gotten a chance to talk.
I'll be quick because I do see that in the chat as well. And I guess I just wanted to go back to the idea of the missing middle as a new category. And just for this, just as we have the discussion moving forward, and Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I look at the maps, the only place where I see this being applied are places that are already developed and did not develop with that amount of density, with the exception of the Whitegate Farm property, which we have discussed in great detail. And so, unless I'm wrong, that would be the only place where there's development potential that hasn't already occurred, and other places where you might go and change the color on the map. That is the one property where I thought it was staff's recommendation to apply this new category. And so there is just that one spot. And to be clear, there is an active live application for rezoning which we aren't going to hear about next week or when we meet again, where the applicant is actually requesting something much more dense than what we have discussed previously. Is that correct, Rachel?
That is the only larger undeveloped parcel that has this designation on it right now, on the proposed map.
Okay, but on the proposed map, it looked like there were some already developed properties where that color got added, but they're already built and they're not 24 units an acre. But just to add that to the group, because I've scoured the map very closely, the only property that has current development potential is that Whitegate Farm property, which also is moving forward in tandem with this process and asking for, I think, 36 per acre. So that helps to put some context into what this category means, you know, countywide, and what it might mean for us here in Crozet while we go through this process.
So I guess maybe, Tori, if you can, I mean, that was my plan before the meeting started, was that I was going to have some help pulling the chat into the live feed. And also, I just wanted to reiterate to attendees that you are able to verbally participate in the discussion if you raise your hand on Zoom. But in the meantime, I'll just say my thought, kind of echoing Jenny, is that considering that the only place in Crozet that this is really going to apply to an undeveloped parcel is, while I like the idea of a new density, you know, category for the county's overall use in Crozet, I'm just not in favor of, you know, I just think that Whitegate Farm should be a lower density considering the overwhelming concerns for infrastructure. And so I'm not in favor of applying it to the map. Tom?
Yeah, two issues on the other property you just talked about. There was a mistake, I think, in the staff in one of their graphs, their charts, that there was a center where that whatever it is, new development. The center designation was the area directly across from Martha Jefferson Centura, the clinic there. That vacant lot was the area for the center, not the property next to it, which was in open space. So just wanted to clarify that it seemed that was a mistake. Two, maybe we can get back to the original issue of this missing middle again. This could have all been built within the context of the neighborhood model. It wasn't. And why wasn't it built? Because the developers knew they had a 99.9% chance that it wasn't going to be sold as an affordable housing in 90 days, and they could sell it. We received data tonight from the county that showed that there were 333 homes proffered for affordability in Crozet. I ran the same figures for 20 years against the county database for development. And I see that there was 2,205 structures built. And what the county tells us is out of the 39 homes, 330 homes proffered, 21 were built, 21. If you look at that in the context of the over 2,000, it's less than 1/10 of 1% of affordable housing got built in Crozet. And meanwhile, this community has been going down time after time again, every time there was rezoning to ensure that the 15% affordable housing proffer, you know, was in place. The reason the Crozet master plan exists, it was because Crozet was looking for a better way to deal with affordable housing. And it didn't want to deal with it as affordable housing developments, but incorporate it into the fabric of the community. I mean, the fact of the matter that the county staff can even mention the word affordable housing without blushing, to me is not understandable. But let's put it this way. That's why we're doing this. And, you know, we'll get the data out to everybody so they can see it. But I just find the whole thing, after all the work this community has put into affordable housing, is disgusting. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and I can share that data we just got like an hour before the meeting from staff members. And yeah, so I guess before we move on, since I haven't heard from my co-hosts about the chat, I'm going to go ahead and say that what I'm seeing on the chat is a lot of concerns about prioritizing infrastructure needs before we discuss increasing density. And if so, I guess I'm going to go ahead and ask the panelists and attendees can chime in the chat specifically if you are in support of applying this middle density category to the Crozet update. Do we want to unmute or raise hands or?
Ali, I do have one question about this before you poll the group. Tom mentioned that, or maybe it was Jenny, mentioned that the only area that this is going to apply to is Whitegate Farm, and that the developer is already seeking an exemption. So the message to the rest of Albemarle County and the other different growth areas is, here's a growth plan that no one is following. And in fact, the first time it was used in Crozet, they sought an exemption. So I just don't see it as meaningful.
I guess I could get more specific with my poll, just say, and since we're talking really about Whitegate, do you guys think that Whitegate should stay in the 3 to 6 range, or should we recommend it at this higher density? So panel, committee members, can I get a show for keeping it in the 3 to 6 range?
Yeah.
Okay, I see I see a lot of hands. I'm not sure if someone's writing this down for me, and you're taking minutes still. And who's in support of making it a higher density?
Would people just put it in the chat? A lot of people aren't even visible here to raise hands. So if you would just write yes or no in favor of middle density on Whitegate Farm, that would be really great. Then we'll have a record.
I agree. Let's have a record. And for what I saw, David, Joe, Valerie is covered up, but I'm going to guess she's for it. And everybody else I saw leaning towards the lower density. But I appreciate all of the attendees also chiming in, because that's what we're having this meeting for, so that Rachel and our other planners get a feel for at least these current stakeholders' thoughts. And I think we can move on to the next. I lost my run of show sheet with all my papers here, but you want to move on to the next topic?
Well, while you're looking, I'll just summarize that having a specific location with its lack or not of sidewalks and things like that to it really makes it easier for people to understand whether a particular place suits this new description or not. Whereas, off of Orchard and within clear instant walking distance to downtown, those are all different things. So while I love the concept of this Bamboo Grove idea, perhaps it needs more guardrails, as Valerie used that term, in order to make it appropriately done. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, so I'll move us on to the next topic. We are going to talk about Old Trail, and I'm going to have Michaela share her screen because my Adobe is still frozen right now. So the next topic we wanted to bring up was the land use within Old Trail. At our last meeting, we talked a little bit about the use along Old Trail Drive in 250, but we wanted to have a larger conversation about the whole Old Trail property based on the feedback and questions that we received last time. So our goals here with the Old Trail recommended changes on the 2020 map are to align the land use with existing and improved uses within Old Trail. Consider proposed uses that have been requested, that specifically is the Crozet Sports that we talked about last time. This does not change the approved Old Trail zoning map amendment that they are currently building in accordance with out in Old Trail. Simply just trying to have the land use map represent what's been approved or built within Old Trail. If the Old Trail developers wanted to make a change to what they're planning to build that is not in accordance with the approved zoning, they would have to go back through that public process of changing their zoning and would have a level of staff review and board approval or denial. Next slide, Michaela. So this map shows the 2010 land use within Old Trail. I'll point out a few things. There's a pink color on the map within the center of Old Trail. That is a mixed use designation that we're no longer using in master plans in the county. So you'll see on the next map that's been updated. But some of the recommendations from Old Trail within 2010 are that it is a mixed use center, but it's secondary to downtown. And that was described in the narrative of the plan in 2010. The density varies by the land use. It can be up to 18 acres in that pink category that I'll talk about how that's changing in a minute. But then a mix of residential, commercial, employment, and office uses recommended in this area. The 2010 plan also calls attention to Route 250 and Old Trail's relationship to Route 250 and recommends a buffer along Route 250 so that development is screened from 250 and there's not a lot of intensity of development out that way. So if you'll move forward to 2020, the changes you'll see are that pink color has changed to brown, and the brown is a new land use category that we've been using in master plans since 2010, since the 2010 plan was adopted, and that's community mixed use. The area for that has expanded a little bit based on what we know has been approved and built in Old Trail, and that is the area right under that M2. We've incorporated that, and that's a block that has a significant commercial portion that's already been built out. And then a little bit to the west in what's called block 26, but that area has not been built out yet. In conversations with the developer, we expect that to be similar in keeping with some of the mixed use development in the adjacent centers. There is a maximum, I will say, of 20,000 square foot of non-residential in that area to the west, based on the approved rezoning. Another change in the 2020 land use map is the village center designation. So we've gotten a little more nuance in our center and how we talk about centers in our master plan since 2010. And we have a variety of different center types. So the village center is the Old Trail center designation, and that's a smaller intensity center than the town center, which is the one in downtown Crozet. The land use change does allow up to 34 units per acre, so it's a little bit higher in density, but remember, that's not saying that Old Trail can build more density than it's already approved. It's just kind of, it's a new land use category that we're using in master plans in the county. That 250 buffer is remaining, that buffered green space along that we're retaining that and carrying that forward. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about what the developer has requested of staff within Old Trail. So we've had some conversations with the developer, and they have been asking if we can look at some of the land use designations that they don't feel are consistent with their approved rezoning in Old Trail. It's not to say they're trying to change their plans. They're just asking that we relook at some of the land use designation in a few of the blocks to more accurately capture what they're planning to build under their approved rezoning. So I'll call attention to block 10, 22, and 32. And those are currently yellow, the neighborhood density designation, and the developer has asked that we look at a middle density designation on that. We have not changed the map to reflect that, but I wanted to bring that to the CAC for consideration and discussion. And then block 19 is what we began to speak about last time, and that's where Crozet Sports has been proposed. Crozet Sports is a large recreational facility that would not be consistent with the neighborhood density land use designation that is on the map today. So staff is recommending if there is support for that use, that we change the land use designation. The developer has asked for a community mixed use land use on that property. Staff thinks an institutional land use could also be appropriate, especially considering the adjacency to the schools. And then lastly, I don't know, Michaela, if you're able to show your cursor over where the clubhouse is just outside of the boundary. The developer has called our attention to this. We actually were not aware that the clubhouse was just outside of the development area boundary until they brought that to our attention. I would look at this as a minor cleanup adjustment to the development area, that we adjust the boundary to include the clubhouse. I don't think that was intended with the SP. I tried to look back at the approved special use permit plan, and it looked like the clubhouse was originally intended inside of the development area. But I just want to call attention to that. It's something we are considering doing at their request. I think it makes sense. They're not looking to expand the clubhouse use, and they have a special use permit that kind of limits what they can do with that use, but it does make sense. It's already served by public water and sewer. So changing the development area a little bit wouldn't affect that. One other thing I will call out, I got some clarity from the Old Trail developer in an email today that I may not have represented. They were looking at some blocks adjacent to block 19 on the west side of Old Trail Drive to see if they could apply a community mixed use to those as well. I wasn't recommending that because of the recommendation to have lower intensity uses up adjacent to 250 and further out from the center designation. So that summarized kind of what we wanted to bring to you all to discuss today. The feedback we've heard so far along Old Trail, though we haven't gotten into much detail, but other than the use on 250, but we did hear support for the Crozet Sports use, though people were concerned about other potential uses if we change the land use there that would be allowed if Crozet Sports didn't happen. And then we've had some support about the village center designation and that was the right center designation for Old Trail. So that brings us to our discussion. Same two questions. Have we accurately summarized the feedback, and what additional comments or questions do you have on these topics?
Thanks, Rachel. All right, Tom, I'll let you go first.
Just one thing on the sports complex. I think if the sports complex gets approved, it should get approved with the same provisos that we did with the Watkins property. That way, with what that means is when Watkins got the comp plan change, he proffered that if he sold the property, it could only be sold for the use that it currently has. So for the sports complex, it should be the same thing. So we don't have a sports complex today and a mini mart tomorrow. Thanks.
Thanks. I agree. I've said this before, and I think my fear was reflected in the last slide. But I think that we should not change the designation of that property without being just. I mean that's just not what the land use map is for. The only thing I would approve there is Crozet Sports, which I would love to see there, but I don't see why we should change the land use map for one specific. I mean, that's what rezonings are for. And if I can't guarantee that it'll be Crozet Sports, then I wouldn't want anything else to be allowed there. And I just feel like we've heard a lot. We always hear that, oh, don't worry, Old Trail's been underdeveloped. Like it was supposed to be this many houses and they're really only building this many houses. And now we're seeing that they want to increase the density in these neighborhoods. And I just don't think that we can handle higher densities. And I also am still, I spoke to Rachel about this earlier, and I'm still concerned about expanding the area in the village center where the color is changing. I understand that it's not increasing the potential density there, but it is I do still worry that it's changing. It would allow more commercial development there than was originally agreed upon. And I just want to reiterate that the point of that, the goal of the master plan is to encourage and preserve downtown Crozet as the main center. So encouraging additional commercial spaces, amphitheaters, et cetera, in Old Trail is in my opinion antithetical to the plan. So Brian, I saw your hand up.
Just two quick comments. One, I agree that the commercial development in Old Trail should be kept to downtown, not in Old Trail. And secondly, if I understood Rachel correctly, there was hesitation on staff's part to offer the same kind of thing as Crozet Sports on the west side of Old Trail Drive, and I just wanted to totally support that. We're trying very hard to keep 250 a undeveloped area and keep that development to downtown. Thanks.
Sorry, if some of you guys are raising your hand on video, sometimes I can't see. I saw David Brockman. Did you want to chime in? Thanks.
Yeah, just for a second, Allie, I just wanted to clarify because your comment that it sounded like you made was that you're stating we're asking to raise the density by these clarifications. I just want to be.
There's a lot of feedback.
I was afraid of that. I can respond in chat.
No, I'd like to hear you. It's helpful for you to chime in, so let's just bear with it.
I tried to fix the feedback before, but it wouldn't go away.
Yeah, just go ahead.
We are not asking to increase the density. And I thought I heard you say that. And
I would like to clarify that, because when I see you go from, whatever it is, neighborhood to middle, it sounds like an increase in density.
Yeah, if I could just finish. We're asking to just have the land use match what our current zoning is. So nothing that has been asked to clarify is increasing what we currently are doing.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming and thanks for chiming in. I appreciate getting the chance to talk to you guys directly instead of, by way of staff report. So I do appreciate you coming tonight. Anybody else want to chime in on this, or I could start trying to reading from the chat too. Go ahead, Anne.
Just while Dave is here, just a question about the increasing the business to the west, which is what I understand you're proposing. Why put business closer to the golf course in the middle of those houses? I thought you were trying to really focus the commercial on the town center properly. So perhaps you can explain a little more.
I think if you can hear me, most of the clarifications on these density designations are really tied more to residential, where we're developing something that's a little bit larger than that. The mixed use piece of Block 26 was just to be able to allow the flow of a pedestrian plaza or pedestrian interface that maybe bridges the line between Block 6 and Block 26. And so it's not clear in that designation that there is almost half of that side of the West Street is the continuation of the village. And so when you look in our application plan, the actual village of Old Trail is on both sides of Old Trail Drive. And that's why that overlay designation is to make that all blend in into the village.
It just looked like it went quite a bit blocks and blocks further to the west. So if that's not the case, that's a very good clarification. It looked like it went all the way to Hazel Grove. So I'm just wondering, that's all.
Yeah, I think it's really not trying to get so micro with the area of a block that if we're taking one designation of a block, if this comprehensive master plan is supposed to give general overlay guidance on land uses, the zoning itself is what controls those blocks. So that's not going away, as Rachel said. And so I think when the county staff is putting designations to things, they're putting designations to land ownerships. If we had to try to carve up a block to say that 1/10 of it will be this, 1/10 will be that, 1/10 will be something else, I don't think that's the macro that you want to get to in comprehensive planning. So I think that that's why it looks more like a general, but it's still going to be controlled by what's allowed and approved through Old Trail and its code of development and its application plan, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, but to Anne's point, if you look at the map, it does look like it's an expansion of the ability to have a commercial component in an area where that didn't previously exist. And so I think that's where some questions have come from is a change being made? Is it a change of substance? And you know, we need to make sure that the community understands that and not just have a color suddenly change on a map. And I know some of the colors change because we want to be consistent, but having the expansion of that is something that I think has caused some questions and curiosity. And so that's why we're here tonight, to try to find out more about that.
Yeah, once again, if you look on our land use designations in code of development, it is currently allowed. So we're not asking to increase it. It's currently allowed under the development's application plan, under its land use designations, and how it integrates, how it blends out to the neighborhoods is just part of crafting the neighborhoods, which I think we've done a very good job of making sure we're transitioning appropriately. And that's why you have overlaying land uses like this, like community mixed uses, that respect the existing zoning that's been approved for it, but allows for a blending of uses as it goes through a village. And that's how a village grows, is it grows with a mix of uses. And that's basically the same thing that's currently approved, and that's what's there, and that's what I think this designation reflects.
Okay. Thanks, David. I still think that it's just like when we look at 2010 versus 2020 proposed changes, the area where you can build commercial things of any nature is now bigger. And that's why I'm bringing this point up again. So, and we were also told at a previous meeting that that expansion was because you were interested in building some kind of amphitheater space and you wanted to be able to put it there. I mean, I understand you're saying that you want to blend it, but I don't, it just seems like now there's more space where commercial use is designated. That's my concern. And if that's not the case, that's fine. But that's like when I looked at the map, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't here in 2010, so I can't speak to that. So what
right, we have the 2010 map in our packet from tonight.
Today is, I'm not sure why that designation, you know, and the designations and the land uses were different. You've changed them from 2010 to today, as Rachel pointed out. So once again, it's just reflecting what's currently approved in those areas. And there is commercial that is allowed under our current zoning in block 26. And so that's reflecting what we currently are allowed to do.
All right, thanks again. I would love for Tori to try to summarize what people have been saying in the chat, if you can.
Sure, I can do that. A lot of the comments and questions have been covered by speakers as well, but Just to jump back real quick, the downtown neighborhoods overlay, there were some comments on infrastructure capacity for schools and sidewalks. Concern about why homes on Indigo Road were left out. And then there were some comments about architecture and form requirements, making sure they're not too much of a burden for development.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Tori. I just meant on this Old Trail topic.
Okay. There was a question about clarification for community mixed use. A question, what would stop Old Trail from building more units if zoning allows? Are there current restrictions on development? There was some mixed feedback for Crozet Sports. There was some support along 250 as long as the buffer is maintained and traffic management is considered. Concern for other uses being allowed. And then there was a question for Crozet Sports versus the Crozet Park special use permit, which is a separate application. And I think there may have been a few more that have come in while I've been talking, so I could start reading through those.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. If what I saw, well, Valerie, I'll go ahead and let you talk while I catch up on the reading.
Okay, thanks. First, I want to be clear and disclose this. As I think most of you know, I have represented the developer of Old Trail over the years. I've been involved in the zoning since it was first proposed back in 2005. So I just want to be really clear about that, but I'm also a resident of Old Trail and obviously on the CCAC. But if I can help provide clarification about this request, in my opinion, the existing master plan designations for some areas in Old Trail are more restrictive than the zoning that is already in place. It was the zoning that was put in place back in 2005. It is the plan that's in place now. I don't know why it was done that way. Dave wasn't around, I wasn't around. I think probably it hit during the recession and the development in Old Trail wasn't going very well, and there probably wasn't much engagement by the developer at that point. But the concern is that if you make the land use designation more restrictive than the zoning, then there are a handful of uses in Old Trail, for instance, in certain blocks that require special use permits. And so if you needed a special use permit for a use and you came through, then if the land use designation is more restrictive, that would almost prohibit a special use permit. So the idea is just to have the land use designation be consistent, not greater than, but consistent with the existing zoning that's in place. And a lot of these blocks that are shown as yellow on the current map actually allow for much higher density than that and allow for commercial uses. They may have been currently developed at a lower density, but nevertheless, the zoning that's in place allows for more than that. So the developer's just asking that it match. And because Old Trail was zoned as neighborhood model district, it is a mixed use, a community mixed use zoning. So we think it's appropriate that the designation match that. So again, not asking for more, just that it match. Thank you.
Right, thanks. I think that I'm just gonna, what I read in the chat, and I appreciate Tim, and I know other people were around in 2005, and Tim says, Tim Tolson, that the zoning was put in place in 2005 for Old Trail was pushed through before the acceptance of the Crozet Master Plan, because the Crozet Master Plan designations would have restricted it further. I still think that the master plan and that what we have and what I'm seeing in the chat is, a concern that commercial development in Old Trail will detract from commercial development downtown. That's all.
But it's already zoned that way. Again, no one's asking to change the zoning and make it more intense, just that
Right,
it match.
but what you said was that it would be more restrictive in the context of a special use permit. That's because we do want to restrict commercial development in Old Trail.
But if a block, for instance, a block in Old Trail under the zoning allows for commercial, but the master plan designation is for low density residential, that's inconsistent and far more restrictive than the zoning.
Right,
So
and I would say perhaps intentionally. I mean, we can disagree till the sun comes up, so it's fine. I just, that's my opinion and that's your opinion. And you know, like you said, represent the developer. So.
Okay. Well, the Old Trail was also zoned after the first master plan.
Right. But, you know, Tim or Tom, if you guys want to chime in, that's fine, but we can also move, you know, I wanted to get to the resolutions and we didn't get to the last, the recommendations part of Rachel's presentation. So I'd like to get a feel from the group of what we'd like to do at this point in the evening. Anybody? Tom?
Yeah, just from a historic perspective, Old Trail was originally brought to the community to be a development of between 800 and 950 homes. And the master plan was underway when this was going on, and the recommendation for Old Trail was for 1,250 homes, I think 125,000 square foot of commercial. And then it went to the board with and David Wyant, our supervisor at the time, voted to double the size of everything. That's why we're here where we are today. Thanks.
This is one of those moments where I wish we were all in a room together because everyone's muted and a lot of videos are off, so I can't really get a feel for where we are as a group. Which makes me feel like maybe we need to wrap up. I was told this afternoon that the November 30th meeting, which we had slated as a community meeting for the Whitegate Farm proposal, they have asked to defer. But since we still have that meeting on our calendars, I personally would like to propose we go ahead and meet and continue this discussion and get into as a committee the resolutions that were sent out last week and work on just continue this discussion. So you know, if anybody wants to chime in, that'd be great.
Is there time to hear the next section of the presentation, even if we hear it again next time, just so people can have a glimpse?
That'd be fine. If you're okay, I don't want to take too much time because it's already 8:45. But Rachel, if you're okay doing the last part of your presentation, I'd be happy to hear that while we have everybody.
That's actually our quickest segment, and Tori's going to cover that. It's I think in 5 minutes, so we can do that.
Okay, sounds great.
Sure. Let's see. I think this should work. Did that show up okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So good evening, everyone. My name is Tori Kanelopoulos, and I'm a senior planner with Albemarle County. The following slides cover the draft land use text recommendations. The land use recommendations are within the character chapter of the master plan, and the guiding principle for this chapter is shown on the screen. And since the individual recommendations have been provided in the advance, I will not read through each one individually, but I will cover each of the 5 goals. The first goal is to support the continued revitalization of downtown as the heart of Crozet with distinctively urban design and to support a mixture of uses in Crozet's other designated centers. This goal recommends short-term and long-term parking solutions, including shared parking agreements, shuttle services, and permanent parking facilities. The goal also proposes wayfinding signage downtown and in other designations throughout Crozet to provide easier access to parking, public amenities, and trails. And we heard from the community that both of these recommendations are especially important. The second goal is to provide a variety of housing options that meet the needs of Crozetians at all income levels. One recommendation is to conduct a survey of naturally occurring affordable housing, also called NOAHs, within Crozet, and to identify programs and tools to support their maintenance and preservation. Staff has received community feedback that preservation of existing NOAHs, especially around downtown, should be a priority. The third goal is to support existing neighborhoods in the historic context of Crozet by ensuring new and infill development is compatible in design and scale with existing neighborhoods. Recommendations for this goal include allowing appropriate scales of infill development and prioritizing the preservation of historic structures through rezonings and special use permits. and also updating appropriate residential zoning categories to allow accessory dwelling units and the conversion of existing single-family homes into multiple units, such as a duplex or a fourplex. And we've heard from the community that creating protections for historic neighborhoods and implementing form recommendations for new and infill development are especially important. The fourth goal is to maintain a distinct rural edge along Crozet's boundary. This goal includes several streetscape recommendations for Route 250 West, where community members have expressed a preference for continuing the 2010 master plan recommendation for a landscape buffer along the southern edge of the development area. The fifth goal is to leverage and amplify Crozet's artisan community, culture, history, and entrepreneurial spirit through creative placemaking projects and partnerships. This goal recommends updates to the downtown Crozet zoning district, abbreviated as the DCD, and other appropriate zoning districts to allow for artisan manufacturing, maker spaces, temporary events, and pop-up uses in downtown. The community has expressed interest in providing opportunities for locally owned and smaller scale businesses, including manufacturing and maker spaces focused on the downtown area. So that concludes our presentation. I know we're a bit short on time now, but I'll let you all wrap up with any remaining questions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Good. Thanks, Tori. Joe, I see your hand up. Do you want to go?
Yeah, just a couple of very specific sort of wording issues, and they're all in the character guiding principle. One is just the word that Crozet is welcoming of new development. I think that word, given what we hear from community members, I don't know if welcoming new and infill development is necessarily what most of Crozet does. I don't know that tolerate is the right word, but
that was just the word I was thinking
permits,
of.
Yeah. I don't know that welcoming quite captures what a lot of people in the community are looking for. The other thing is in that sentence, compatible in scale and design with, I think maybe specifying with what, compatible with what. And I think maybe something like what's down in number 3, compatible in design and scale with existing neighborhood fabric or something like that, just some sort of comparison as to what it's compatible with. And then lastly is a consideration, and this may be more broad because I think it speaks to some of Tom's concerns in his resolution, adding in there, that development that is, new development that is compatible with existing developments with patterns, provides housing choice, and is also, takes into account infrastructure availability and needs and capacity. I think that is mindful of infrastructure needs and capacity in some respects, somewhere in there, acknowledging that that's part of the welcoming of new development.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate your attention to those words. And I like that we are getting a chance to really weigh in on this because the precise language is exactly what we want this update to get right. I just want to say, I think that we're the goals are pretty good, but I agree with Joe's suggestions. So I want to ask the committee members if you've had a chance to look at the resolutions that were sent out, and if you guys would want to start our next meeting with the discussion of that, like where we stand right now as a group about those. I got feedback individually from a few of you, but would like to hear sort of a show of hands if there's support for moving forward with those resolutions.
Very much so.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Allie. And maybe also if we could just make a note, I don't know if other people really had a chance to dive into these recommendations. I mean, I feel like I read some of them, but I really want to go line by line in here and kind of, so maybe that might be a good place to start the conversation because it kind of ties in with the resolutions. It's like being very specific about the wording and what we're looking for. So maybe just,
yeah, they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So if that works for the rest of you, maybe a nod or a thumbs up, or see you on the 30th, a sigh from David, I see you.
See you on the 30th.
Allie?
Yes, Doug.
Can we agree that we can send Joe some specific comments, or how do you want to handle it?
Yeah, that would be great. We could send.
Sorry, Joe.
No, I think he's up for it. Am I wrong, Joe? Does that work for you?
It's fine. I mean, I think that's fine. I just wanted to have a conversation where we really sort of went through those recommendations with a fine tooth comb, and that, you know, if we had any small tweaks even to that language, we were able to voice them very specifically.
Right.
I'm happy to collect comments though, if people want to send them to me.
Thanks.
I have an announcement, if I may, before you pull the plug.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Anne scheduled a town hall for next week.
A week from tonight, with the help of our county staff, we will be doing a virtual town hall. I am asking, and the first blast of the links has already gone out. We will do that again next week. But I would love it if people would email me with questions so that I can make sure to have time to get details from county staff and have a more responsible response. One of the hardest things about town halls is not having any understanding ahead of time of where the deep questions are going to go. And then I'm not as prepared, and there's a lot of follow-up that is less helpful than having an answer right on the spot. So I really look forward to seeing all of you, and bring your friends, and send your questions to me. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm going to take a second right now to just copy paste the chat into the minutes, and then so don't turn that off yet. Okay.
No worries. Yeah, we're not gonna lose the chat. And Jenny, I saw you wanted to make.
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for working with everyone, and Tim and Sean and others who have tried to create a town hall platform where we can talk about this process, and can take on questions about other issues that the community has. I think that's really great. In the chats, I noticed that Anne's town hall is next Thursday, and it sounds like in the chats that the Whitegate Village, which is the development that's moving forward in parallel with the conversation that we've been having through the master plan process about the Whitegate farm property, it sounds like there's a meeting that's set up next Thursday also, that will be those developers reaching out to adjacent property owners and community members. So that is something I would very much like to. And the question in the chat was that this is planned, and is county staff planning to attend? And I would like to figure out if we can maybe not have those things happening on the same night, and or maybe they're at different times, but I think that I'd like to learn more about that. I would like to attend that. I think we need to figure that out, because that's two kind of important things happening on the same night. And
it is funny to find that out tonight, and I appreciate, Susan, you coming and mentioning that, because it sounds like they were hoping to meet with neighbors before they had their meeting, which they had previously scheduled on the 30th. So
maybe we can like have staff, or however we figure that out, if we could like reschedule that portion for them. I don't know how far along they've gotten that process, but ideally we would not have those on the same night, so we can have full concentration on the town hall, and then also those who want to attend that be present for that. And then I just noticed that, I don't know if Tom wanted to bring up this last point. I know we've gone over, and I appreciate staff bearing with us and all members of the CCAC and the community, but just Tom, I don't know if you just wanted to leave that in the chat, because we'll all have copies of this, or if you would like to have a comment.
Yeah, Jenny, I'll send out the paper, the issue that I had about the population. I think it'll be enough for everybody to take a look at it for the next meeting. And I hope there will be a next meeting, because I think we're far from done with this issue on land use. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I don't think we're going to need as much staff input next time. We have enough to work with. We'll just, want. So I know that Rachel doesn't want to have, isn't going to have time to prepare more presentations, but but I think we've got plenty to work on. And I really appreciate all of you coming tonight, and the chat was excellent. And I'm glad I don't know if you know, Anne, you can hit the little ... and that pops up save chat, and that will save a copy of it for you. Anybody else who wants to read the discussion, you can save it to your own computer that way.
Say it again.
So like where it says, where you would type a message, there's a little ... where you would change, it says to, and then there's a menu, and you can pop that up and it says save chat or merge to meeting when, do you see it now? I'll save it and send it to you. Okay. All right.
Great, thank you.
Any other closing comments, or I'll let us go. We're half an hour over our plan. I appreciate you guys all sticking around so long. Okay, good night.
This has been a spectacular meeting, and I'm so appreciative of everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. We had over 40 attendees most of the evening too, so I really appreciate you guys coming out for this. Good night.